Incoming patient, gunshot wound. Get me to surgery prep now.
This way, gentlemen. We're ready for him in OR3.
The automatic doors to the ER slammed open. Boots hit the tile. Hard. Fast. Clear the hallway. A voice barked. 2 armed military police pushed through the corridor, forcing nurses and patients aside. Behind them strode a broad-shouldered officer in combat fatigues, jaw tight, eyes burning with urgency. On the gurney between them lay an unconscious soldier, chest rising in shallow, uneven breaths. Move. The officer snapped again. Inside the trauma bay, machines beeped steadily. Doctors turned at the sudden noise. A young nurse stepped forward from the supply cart, her badge swinging slightly as she moved. "Sir, you can't bring weapons into—" "Not now." The officer cut her off without even looking at her. He shoved past, grabbing the rail of the gurney. "This man needs a surgeon. Now." One of the attending doctors hurried over. "What happened?" "Convoy attack outside the base perimeter," the officer replied sharply. "Shrapnel. Internal bleeding. He doesn't have time for paperwork." The young nurse stepped closer, calm but firm. "Sir, you need to step back so we can stabilize." The officer's head snapped toward her. For the first time, he actually looked at her. Young. Rookie badge. No rank pins. Just a standard hospital uniform. His expression hardened. "Stay out of this," he growled. The room went quiet. A few nurses exchanged uneasy glances. The tension in the officer's posture made it clear he wasn't used to being questioned. The nurse didn't move. She placed a hand on the gurney rail, steady. "If you don't step back," she said evenly, "you're going to contaminate the sterile field." The officer leaned closer, towering over her. "You don't understand the situation." His voice dropped, low and dangerous. "That soldier answers directly to a 3-star command. If he dies because someone slowed us down with hospital protocol, he might die." The nurse interrupted quietly. "If you keep blocking the trauma team." The words landed like a slap. A murmur rippled through the room. The officer's jaw clenched. "You think you can tell me how this works?" he snapped. The young nurse held his gaze, unflinching. Behind them, the heart monitor beeped faster, and somewhere in the hallway outside, heavy footsteps were approaching. The trauma bay lights hummed overhead, bright, clinical, unforgiving. The soldier on the gurney groaned faintly as the surgical team cut away the remains of his uniform. Burned fabric, blood-soaked bandages from the field. A medic stood near the wall, still breathing hard from the run-in. "Shrapnel entered left flank," he reported quickly. "Field pressure slowed the bleeding, but it's not holding." The senior surgeon nodded without looking up. "BP. Dropping." The room moved with controlled urgency. Metal trays clinked. Gloves snapped tight. Monitors pulsed with quiet alarms. The officer who had stormed in, the one who had pushed through the hallway like the hospital belonged to him, still stood at the foot of the gurney. Arms crossed, jaw locked. His name patch read Colonel Harris. Anyone in the room with even basic familiarity with military command structure knew that rank carried weight. And Harris carried it like armor. He watched every movement the staff made. Every instrument, every whispered instruction. Hospitals near military installations were used to pressure. Injured service members arrived all the time. But Harris wasn't behaving like a typical escorting officer. He was hovering, dominating the space. More than once, a nurse had to lean around him just to reach equipment. The young nurse he had snapped at earlier moved along the opposite side of the gurney. Her name tag read Nurse Carter. The tag was new, the plastic still clear and unscuffed. One of the older nurses murmured quietly as Carter adjusted the 4-line. "First month." Carter didn't look up. "Third week." The older nurse gave the faintest nod. That explained the rookie badge clipped beneath Carter's ID. New staff always wore them, a subtle signal to supervisors. And, in places like this, an easy label for anyone impatient with inexperience. Across the room, Harris noticed it too. His eyes lingered on the badge, then on her hands. Steady hands. No shaking. Still, the label had already settled in his mind. Rookie. Another monitor chirped. The surgeon spoke quickly. We need imaging now. Possible internal hemorrhage. A tech started pushing the portable scanner closer. Harris stepped forward again, blocking the movement without even realizing it. Carter looked up. Sir. He ignored her. The medic from the convoy shifted uncomfortably near the wall. Even he seemed unsure whether to speak. Inside military culture, rank dictated everything. You didn't interrupt a colonel unless you absolutely had to. Carter stepped closer to the gurney again. Colonel Harris, she said calmly. That got his attention. He turned slowly. You're in the way of the imaging equipment. A pause. Long enough that several people in the room stopped moving. Harris looked at the scanner. Then at Carter. His voice lowered. You're very confident for someone wearing a rookie badge. Carter met his gaze without flinching. Behind them, the heart monitor gave a sharper beep. The surgeon didn't even glance up. Less conversation, he said sharply. More room to work. For a moment, Harris didn't move. The tension in the room thickened. Then, with visible reluctance, he stepped half a pace back. Just enough for the scanner to slide into place. Carter adjusted the 4 again. Precise. Controlled. As if the pressure in the room didn't exist. Across the bay, one of the nurses whispered quietly to another. He's been like that since they came in. The other nurse muttered back. Colonels usually are. But Harris wasn't watching the surgeon anymore. His eyes kept drifting back to Carter. Something about her calm bothered him. Most rookies in their first month avoided direct eye contact with senior officers. They nodded. They apologized. They stayed quiet. Carter did none of those things. She just worked. And every time the monitors chirped, she was the first one already moving. The portable scanner hummed as it slid over the wounded soldier's torso. Everyone in the trauma bay leaned slightly closer to the monitor. Gray shapes flickered across the screen. Bone. Tissue. Dark shadows that shouldn't be there. The surgeon frowned. Hold him steady. 2 nurses pressed gently against the soldier's shoulders. The heart monitor gave a nervous rhythm of beeps. Too fast. Too uneven. Colonel Harris stood a few feet back now, but the tension in his posture hadn't eased. His arms remained crossed, boots planted like he was still commanding a field operation instead of standing in a hospital. He watched everything, especially Nurse Carter. She moved with quiet efficiency along the side of the bed, adjusting the flow, checking the oxygen line, glancing at the monitor with brief, sharp looks. Not long looks, quick ones, like someone already used to reading them. One of the surgical residents noticed. He hesitated for a moment before speaking. Pressure's falling again, he said. The surgeon gave a curt nod. Prepare another unit. Carter was already reaching for the blood pack before the words finished. The resident paused, just a fraction of a second, then continued working. Across the room, the older nurse from earlier glanced at Carter again. Something thoughtful passed across her face. Not surprise, recognition, but she said nothing. The scanner tech adjusted the imaging arm again. Hold position, he said. Everyone stilled. Even Harris. On the monitor, a darker pocket appeared near the soldier's abdomen. The surgeon exhaled slowly. There it is. He leaned closer. Internal bleed. Likely splenic. The room shifted immediately into another level of urgency. Prep or 2, the surgeon ordered. Now. A nurse moved toward the phone. But before she reached it, Carter spoke quietly. Sir. The surgeon didn't look up. Yes. Her voice stayed calm. His oxygen saturation is dropping faster than the blood loss suggests. That made the surgeon glance toward the monitor. The numbers flickered. The resident frowned. You think lung involvement? Carter didn't answer right away. She stepped slightly closer to the gurney, eyes scanning the soldier's chest. Listening. The room held its breath for a moment. Even Harris noticed. His gaze narrowed. What is it? The surgeon asked. Carter spoke carefully. Possibly secondary trauma. The surgeon studied the monitor again. Then the patient. Then Carter. You hear something. She hesitated. Only briefly. Something's not matching. It was an unusual way to say it. Vague, precise at the same time. The surgeon didn't challenge her, but he didn't fully accept it either. Let's focus on the bleed first, he said. Carter nodded once. Yes, sir. Across the bay, the older nurse leaned closer to the resident. She's noticing things early, she murmured. The resident whispered back. Lucky guess. But his tone lacked conviction. Colonel Harris shifted his weight again. He had been in enough high-pressure situations to recognize when experienced people grew quiet. And the room had grown quieter. Not slower, just quieter. Carter moved around the bed again, checking the soldier's pupils with a small light. Her movements were careful, almost deliberate, like she was measuring something in her head. Harris watched her. That steady calm still bothered him. Rookies didn't behave like this. They asked questions. They second-guessed themselves. They glanced at supervisors for approval. Carter didn't. She just continued working, speaking only when necessary. The medic from the convoy shifted near the doorway. He had been silent the entire time, but now his eyes moved between Carter and the surgeon, as if waiting for someone to say something. Nobody did. Another alarm chirped softly. The oxygen number dipped again. The surgeon frowned harder now. Ventilation check. The respiratory tech stepped forward quickly. Carter was already adjusting the mask seal before he reached the bedside. Their hands nearly collided. The tech blinked, then finished the adjustment. Airway looks clear, he said. The surgeon muttered under his breath. That drop still doesn't make sense. Across the room, Harris noticed something small. Very small. The older nurse was watching Carter again. Not like she was watching a rookie. More like she was watching someone she expected to take charge. Harris straightened slightly. His eyes drifted back to Carter. The rookie badge still hung from her uniform. Bright, obvious. But the room didn't seem to treat it the way it had 10 minutes ago. Nobody said anything. Nobody pointed it out. Yet a quiet shift had begun. Carter finished checking the soldier's airway again and stepped back half a step. Her gaze moved once across the monitors, then to the surgeon. She opened her mouth slightly, then closed it again, like someone choosing their words very carefully. The heart monitor beeped again, sharper this time, and for the first time since they arrived, Colonel Harris felt the faintest edge of unease crawl up the back of his neck. The alarms didn't spike all at once. They crept upward, a subtle change in rhythm, the kind of shift experienced staff noticed before the machines made it obvious. Carter noticed first. Her eyes flicked to the monitor, then to the soldier's chest. His breathing pattern had changed shorter, tighter. The respiratory tech frowned. Vent pressures rising. The surgeon didn't look up from the imaging screen. Adjust it. The tech twisted a dial. The machine hissed softly, but the number didn't improve. Across the bed, Carter leaned closer. Her fingers pressed lightly against the soldier's ribcage, just below the left side. She held there for a moment, feeling, listening. The heart monitor beeped again. Faster. Colonel Harris shifted his stance. What's happening? He demanded. The surgeon answered without looking up. Complications. That word hung in the air like a warning flare. The medic by the doorway rubbed the back of his neck. Sir. He was breathing fine when we loaded him. No one responded. Carter's hand moved slightly across the soldier's chest again. Her brow tightened. The surgeon glanced at the oxygen monitor again. Why is that still dropping? The respiratory tech shook his head. Airways clear. The surgeon turned back toward the imaging screen. Focus on the bleed. But Carter didn't step away. Her fingers pressed again along the rib line. Lower this time, then higher. Searching. Across the room, the older nurse noticed. You think something else is going on? She murmured. The resident shrugged. Maybe she's just nervous. But his eyes didn't leave Carter's hands. They were too deliberate, too methodical. Colonel Harris noticed it too. He watched the way she moved, measured, quiet, like she was following a pattern no one else had seen yet. Speak up if you've got something, Harris said suddenly. The room paused. Carter looked up at him. For a moment their eyes met. Then she looked back at the surgeon instead. "Sir," she said carefully. The surgeon glanced toward her. "Yes." She chose her words slowly. "The oxygen drop doesn't match the bleed rate." He frowned. "You said that already." Carter nodded. "Yes, sir." She hesitated, then added, "But it's accelerating." The surgeon studied the monitor again. The resident leaned closer. "He's right," the resident muttered. "That's faster than expected." The surgeon's jaw tightened. He looked down at the soldier's chest, then at Carter. "You hearing diminished breath sounds?" Carter didn't answer immediately. She leaned down again, placing a stethoscope against the soldier's side. The room waited. Even Harris stopped moving. Carter shifted the stethoscope slightly. Once, twice. Her expression didn't change, but the silence stretched longer than anyone liked. Finally, the surgeon spoke again. "Well." Carter straightened slowly. Her voice stayed calm. "Left side is quieter than it should be." The respiratory tech frowned. "That doesn't make sense. Airway's clear." Carter nodded once. "I know." The surgeon stepped closer to the bed now. He listened himself. 10 seconds passed, then 15. When he stood upright again, his expression had changed. Only slightly, but enough for the resident to notice. "You hear it too?" the resident asked. The surgeon didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at Carter again. "You think we're missing something?" Carter didn't jump to conclusions. She simply said, "Something isn't adding up." Across the room, Harris exhaled impatiently. "Then say it plainly." Carter turned toward the monitor again. Her eyes moved across 3 different numbers. Oxygen, pressure, heart rate. Her gaze returned to the soldier's chest. Then the surgeon. "If it were just internal bleeding," she said slowly, "the oxygen decline shouldn't be this sharp." The resident crossed his arms. "So what are you suggesting?" Carter hesitated again, like someone double-checking a calculation in her head. Then she spoke. "Possibly pressure building in the chest." The respiratory tech blinked. "You mean?" The surgeon raised a hand, cutting him off. His eyes stayed on Carter. "A tension issue." Carter didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. The surgeon turned back to the patient. His expression had grown thoughtful now. Colonel Harris watched the exchange from the foot of the bed. He didn't understand all the medical language, but he understood one thing clearly. The room had shifted. 10 minutes ago, Carter had been the rookie everyone ignored. Now the surgeon was studying her like a second opinion. The resident glanced between them. "You really think that's it?" Carter spoke quietly. "I think it would explain the numbers." The surgeon leaned closer to the patient again, listening, thinking. Another alarm chirped. The oxygen dropped another point. Across the room, the older nurse folded her arms slowly. The medic near the doorway whispered under his breath. "I knew something felt off." Colonel Harris stared at Carter. His eyes narrowed, because for the first time since he stormed into the ER, he had the strange, uncomfortable feeling that the rookie nurse might be seeing the situation more clearly than anyone else in the room. And the surgeon hadn't dismissed her. The oxygen alarm shrieked. A sharp, rising tone that cut through the trauma bay. The number dropped again. 82, the resident said quickly. The surgeon's eyes snapped to the monitor. Damn it. He looked back at the patient's chest, thinking fast now. Colonel Harris stepped forward again. "Someone tell me what's happening." No one answered. Carter was already moving. She stepped to the equipment tray and picked up a long decompression needle. The resident blinked. "Wait!" Carter's voice cut through the room. "Left side tension pneumothorax." The surgeon froze, for half a second, just long enough to realize she was right. But before he could give the order, Carter moved. One precise motion. She inserted the needle between the ribs. A sharp hiss of escaping air burst from the valve. The soldier's chest lifted. The oxygen monitor jumped. 82, 85, 89. The entire room stared. The surgeon looked from the monitor to Carter. The resident whispered under his breath. "Holy!" Across the bed, the respiratory tech checked the numbers again. It's stabilizing. Colonel Harris stared at Carter like he had never seen her before. The surgeon stepped closer. You diagnosed that fast. Carter calmly disposed of the needle and adjusted the oxygen line. I've seen it before. The surgeon studied her face. Something in his expression sharpened. Where? Carter hesitated. Just briefly. Then she reached up and unclipped the clear rookie badge from beneath her ID. The plastic card dropped into her hand. She flipped it over. The backside carried a second credential. One rarely worn in hospitals. The surgeon read it. His posture changed instantly. Good Lord. The room went silent. Colonel Harris frowned. What is it? The surgeon looked at him, then back at Carter. His voice had shifted, respectful now. You might want to stand down, Colonel. Harris stiffened. Why? The surgeon nodded toward Carter. Because that rookie nurse you were arguing with, he paused, is a combat trauma instructor assigned to advanced battlefield medicine training. The medic near the doorway straightened immediately. The respiratory tech stepped back half a pace. Even the resident's mouth fell slightly open. Carter simply reattached her ID to her uniform. Calm. Professional. As if nothing unusual had happened. The oxygen monitor climbed to 93. And for the first time since entering the ER, Colonel Harris had nothing to say. For a few seconds after the oxygen monitor stabilized, no one spoke. The sharp alarms faded into steady, controlled beeping. 93. 94. The soldier's breathing deepened slightly under the mask. The respiratory tech exhaled in relief and adjusted the ventilator settings. Pressure's normalizing, he said quietly. The surgeon nodded once. Good. His voice had returned to the calm tone of someone used to regaining control of a situation. He turned back to the team. Prep for OR. We still have internal bleeding to address. The room moved again, but the atmosphere had changed. Not chaotic anymore. Focused. Professional. And different in one subtle way. People kept glancing at Carter. The resident walked past her carrying a tray of instruments. He hesitated. Good catch, he muttered. Carter simply nodded. Thanks. No pride. No explanation. Just acknowledgement. Across the trauma bay, the older nurse gave Carter a look that carried quiet approval. The kind experienced staff rarely gave out easily. Meanwhile, Colonel Harris stood near the foot of the bed. Still. Silent. A few minutes earlier he had filled the room with command presence. Now he watched as the team prepared to move the soldier toward surgery. Carter checked the 4-line one last time before the transport team rolled the gurney forward. The wheels rattled softly across the tile. As the bed passed him, Harris spoke. Not loudly. Nurse Carter. She stopped. Turned. Yes, Colonel. The difference in tone was obvious. He no longer towered over her. No longer barked orders. He looked thoughtful. You acted without waiting for the surgeon's command. The statement wasn't an accusation. More like an observation. Carter held his gaze calmly. He was about to call it, she replied. I just moved faster. Harris studied her for a moment. Then he nodded slowly, the kind of nod officers gave when acknowledging competence. I misjudged you earlier. The words seemed uncomfortable in his mouth, but he said them anyway. That happens, Carter replied. No bitterness. No lecture. Just a fact. Across the room, the surgeon finished signing the surgical transfer forms. Before the team pushed the gurney through the double doors, he looked back at Carter. You've done battlefield training before. Carter adjusted the strap on her ID badge. Yes, sir. Recently. Last year. The surgeon nodded. That explains the reflex. He didn't say more than that. He didn't need to. The resident standing beside him had already started looking at Carter differently. Not as the rookie with the plastic badge, but as someone who had seen things most hospital staff hadn't. The surgical doors swung open. The gurney rolled through. And just like that, the center of the crisis disappeared down the hallway. The trauma bay grew quiet again. Monitors reset. Tools were cleared away. The controlled rhythm of the ER returned. Carter washed her hands at the sink. methodical, routine, like any other shift. Behind her, Harris remained near the doorway, watching, not suspicious anymore, not impatient, just thoughtful. After a moment, he gave a short nod to no one in particular and walked out into the corridor. The staff returned to their stations. Work continued, but the story of what had happened in the trauma bay had already begun spreading quietly through the ER. Not dramatically, just the way these things always did, in low voices, between people who had seen enough to recognize skill when it appeared. The emergency room slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Not quiet, ERs were never quiet, but familiar. Phones rang again. Monitors beeped in their steady patterns. A stretcher rolled past the nurse's station with a patient complaining loudly about a broken wrist. Life resumed the way it always did in places like this. Controlled chaos. Inside the trauma bay, the floor had already been cleaned. Fresh instruments replaced the used ones. The signs of the crisis were gone, wiped away in less than 20 minutes. But the people who had been in that room hadn't forgotten. At the nurse's station, 2 residents spoke in low voices while reviewing charts. "You see the way she moved," one said. The other nodded. "Didn't hesitate. That wasn't a guess." "No." They both looked down the hallway toward the surgical wing, because everyone who had been there understood the same thing now. That moment hadn't been luck. It had been recognition. Across the room, the older nurse who had spoken to Carter earlier poured herself a cup of coffee. She leaned against the counter, watching the shift continue. Our veterans learned to read people quickly. Fear had a look. Inexperience had a look. And calm under pressure had a look too. Carter had carried that calm like second nature. Even when a colonel had been standing in front of her, challenging every word. The doors to the surgical corridor opened briefly as another team moved through. Still no update yet. Surgery took time, but the tension had eased, because the soldier had made it to the operating room alive. And that alone meant something had gone right. Near the far wall, a young intern flipped through a medical manual, clearly still replaying what he had seen. "You think she's really trained for battlefield medicine?" he asked quietly. The older nurse smiled faintly. "You don't move like that unless you've seen it before." The intern nodded slowly. On the other side of the ER, Carter finished entering notes into the patient chart. Her typing was steady and precise. There was no sense of someone reliving a dramatic moment. To her, it was just documentation. Time of intervention. Symptoms observed. Procedure performed. Medical language had a way of reducing life and death decisions into calm, clinical sentences. When she finished, she closed the file and stepped away from the terminal. A moment later, the trauma bay doors opened again. The surgeon walked back in. His surgical cap was gone now, tucked under his arm. The room looked up. "How is he?" someone asked. The surgeon set the cap on the counter. "He'll make it." A quiet breath of relief spread through the staff. The resident near the coffee machine grinned. "Good call, then." The surgeon nodded once. "Yes." His eyes moved briefly across the room until they landed on Carter. "You available for a consult later?" he asked. Carter raised an eyebrow slightly. "On what?" "Trauma protocols," he said. "I'd like to review something." She nodded. "Sure." There was no ceremony to it. No applause. Just professional acknowledgement. Which, in a hospital like this, meant more than anything dramatic. Across the corridor outside the ER, Colonel Harris stood near a window overlooking the base parking lot. The sun had already begun to dip toward the horizon. Golden light stretched across the asphalt and the rows of military vehicles parked in careful lines. Harris had been standing there longer than he realized. For most of his career, command had been simple. You gave orders. Others followed them. Structure created clarity. Rank created authority. It worked on battlefields. It worked in convoys. It worked in every military system designed around discipline. But today had reminded him of something quieter. Authority didn't always come from rank. Sometimes it came from knowledge, from experience, from the ability to see what others missed. Inside the ER, Carter walked past the window on her way to the supply room. Harris noticed her reflection in the glass before he noticed her footsteps. He turned. Nurse Carter. She stopped. Yes, Colonel. The tone between them had shifted completely since the first moment in the trauma bay. No tension now. Just conversation. Harris studied her for a moment. You've worked in combat zones before. It wasn't a question. Carter nodded. Training rotations. Enough to recognize that condition in seconds. Sometimes seconds are all you get. Harris considered that. He had led soldiers into enough dangerous situations to understand exactly what she meant. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally he said, You know, when I walked into that room earlier, Carter waited. I assumed rank meant I understood the situation better than everyone else. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she leaned lightly against the wall beside the window. Rank usually means responsibility, she said calmly. Harris looked back toward the parking lot. That's not the same thing. No, Carter agreed. Silence settled between them again. Not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. Inside the ER, someone called for a nurse to assist with a new patient. Another ambulance siren sounded faintly outside. The world kept moving. Eventually Harris gave a small nod. The kind soldiers used when acknowledging something they had learned. Good work today. Carter accepted the words with the same calm she had shown all afternoon. Thank you, Colonel. She pushed away from the wall and headed back toward the trauma bay. Another patient was already arriving. Another crisis waiting. Another moment where someone would need to act quickly. Harris watched her disappear through the ER doors. Then he looked once more at the hospital building behind him. In the military, respect was often displayed with salutes. Sharp, formal, clear. But sometimes respect appeared in quieter ways. In the willingness to admit when someone else saw the battlefield more clearly than you did. And sometimes the most important lesson in leadership wasn't about giving orders. It was about knowing when to step aside and let the right person act. 1.